Yeah.
so AI, right. It keeps throwing these curveballs at us.
Yeah.
Like just when you think you've got a handle on things, something else pops up.
It really does.
And this whole thing with Elon Musk's Grok AI, it's
spicy.
yeah, it's getting a little spicy over on X, formerly Twitter.
Yeah.
And some of its response have been like, oh, really?
Yeah, making headlines, it's really interesting.
It really is. And it makes you wonder where this whole AI thing is going.
Well, and what's so interesting is this isn't just about like a chatbot with a bit of a personality.
Right.
It's about who's responsible for the stuff that happens online when you have increasingly sophisticated AI.
Right.
And this case with Grok and the legal challenge between X and the Indian government, it's really cutting edge. It's really bringing up some fundamental questions.
It really is. And it's not happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Like at the same time that Grok's been making waves, X is in this legal tussle with the Indian government over how they're using Section 79 of the IT Act for content moderation, right? And we've got some news pieces here that really highlight both of these stories.
Yeah.
So what we want to do today is really dig into this whole idea of AI accountability and how that intersects with online content and content regulation.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot, but we're going to break it all down so you can really understand why this is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it's like the legal and societal systems playing catch up to AI.
Right.
So we've got these stress tests happening right now.
They're happening in real time.
In real time.
Okay, so first let's introduce our main player here, Grok AI. So for anyone who might not know, Grok is an AI chatbot. It comes from Elon Musk's company, XAI.
Right.
And Musk's vision for it is to be this kind of outspoken alternative to other AI models like ChatGPT and Gemini.
Yeah, you know, it's not meant to be a bland, neutral AI.
Right.
He really wants something with a little bit more of an edge.
Yeah, an unfiltered perspective, maybe.
Unfiltered, yeah, exactly.
And it's got these really interesting features that kind of contribute to that. So unlike a lot of other AI models, Grok has access to real-time public data from X. So it's got really up-to-date information.
That's a key difference, right? It's not working with static data. It's really plugged
into the fire hose, yeah.
Yeah.
And plus, it's directly integrated into the platform. So you can actually tag Grok in a post, and it can reply.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
It's very cool, yeah.
And then there's this thing called unhinged mode.
Yes.
Which is available for premium users.
Uh-huh.
And as you can imagine, it allows for content that's a bit more unconventional.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very deliberate choice. Unhinged mode. It says, we're going to push some boundaries here.
It really does. and even the name Grok is deliberate. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's from that Robert Heinlein science fiction novel, Stranger in a Strange Land. And Musk has said that it means, you know, to really fully and profoundly understand something.
To get it, to really grasp it at a deep level.
So the idea is that this AI is supposed to really, like, get the nuances of things.
Right. Which makes you wonder, then, what does it mean when it produces something that's a little off?
Exactly.
Because it had...
It's supposed to have this deep understanding.
Yeah.
So what happens when those outputs are controversial?
Well, that's what we're seeing, right? Because it has been producing some responses that have raised eyebrows.
It has.
We're talking about instances where it's used, maybe some strong language, expressing biases, and even somewhat ironically, identifying some conservative users, including Elon Musk himself, as sources of misinformation.
Which I find fascinating,
right?
Because it suggests the spiciness, if you will, doesn't necessarily line up neatly with a particular viewpoint.
No, it doesn't.
So it's another layer to understanding how this thing behaves.
Right. And we've seen some examples of this, like reports of it using a misogynistic Hindi slur and making other statements that you could say are inflammatory.
And obviously the reaction online was immediate.
Oh, yeah.
People started interacting with it even more.
Yeah, of course.
Which kind of fueled the whole debate around AI responsibility.
Right.
So the big question that keeps coming up is this. If Grok's responses are in some way a reflection of the attitudes on the X platform, then who is really responsible for what it's saying?
That is the million-dollar question, or maybe the billion-dollar question at this point. Because on the one hand, you could say, well, Grok is just computer code, right?
Yeah.
It's processing data. Yeah. It doesn't have personal beliefs or intentions in a humorous sense.
Right. It's not a person.
So how do you hold it accountable?
Right. It's like that analogy that we've been seeing, about trying to sue the ocean for being wet.
Yeah.
It's trained on this huge amount of human-generated data, which includes, good stuff, bad stuff, everything.
Everything.
So if it generates something that's unsavory, where do you even begin to draw the line?
Right. So it's not just about whether AI can be held accountable. It's like, where does that accountability lie?
Right, exactly.
So should it be XAI, the company? Should it be X, the platform?
Right.
Maybe the engineers who design the algorithms?
Right, or the people who train the data.
Or the data annotators, right? These are all valid questions, and it's a tangled web. And as we're seeing, governments all over the world are trying to figure this out.
Yeah, and a part of that figuring out involves these things called safe harbor laws, right?
Yeah.
So in India, like in a lot of other places, online platforms, X, Meta, YouTube, these guys have been given some protection under these laws.
Uh-huh.
And it's specifically through Section 79 of the IT Act.
Right.
And the basic idea is that they're not generally liable for the content that users create and post.
So they're not treated as the publisher of everything that goes up on their platform.
Right. But here's the big question, right? Does this protection extend to content that's actually generated by an AI operating on the platform?
Uh-huh.
Like in this case, Grok's responses.
It's a different scenario, right, than if a human user posts something.
It is.
This is an AI that's part of the platform, making content.
Right. So this is where that Air Canada case gets really interesting.
Yeah.
You might remember this case where Air Canada's AI chatbot
Yeah, their chatbot.
gave a customer the wrong information about their refund policy.
Uh-huh.
And the court actually ruled that Air Canada had to honor that incorrect policy.
Wow.
So basically, they treated the AI as a publisher.
As a publisher of information, yeah.
Which the company was then responsible for.
So it's possible that AI chatbots could be held to that same standard.
Right. Like you said, as publishers.
At least in certain contexts, though you do have to think about context, right?
Right.
An AI giving medical advice is going to be held to a much higher standard than a conversational AI on a social media platform.
That makes sense. And looking forward, people are talking about a safe harbor framework just for AI developers.
Yeah, this is interesting.
So the idea would be to give them some protection if they follow certain due diligence standards when they're developing AI.
So kind of encourage them to build responsibly without being penalized for every little thing.
Right, exactly. And it might be modeled after things like end-user license agreements, EULAs, or those user conduct policies that some companies have for their large language models.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's shift gears for a minute. Let's talk about this legal challenge between X and the Indian government.
Yeah.
So it's a separate issue from Grok, but it's all connected to this big question of online content regulation.
How do we handle online content? Yeah, absolutely.
So X is fighting the government's use of Section 79, 3B of the IT Act to force them to remove certain content.
Okay, so to understand this, we need to look at Section 79. It basically provides a safe harbor for platforms like X.
Right.
But there's a subsection, 793B. It says that protection goes away if a platform doesn't remove illegal content after they know about it or if the government tells them about it.
Okay, so this is where the Shreya Singhal case comes in.
Yes.
This is back in 2015. In this case, the Supreme Court struck down Section 66A of the IT Act.
Right, 66A criminalized sending offensive or false information online. And the Supreme Court said it was too vague.
Yeah, it was too vague and a threat to free speech.
Right. You can't just have this broad, sweeping law that chills free speech.
Right. And that same judgment placed limits on Section 79 3B as well, right?
That's right. The court clarified that platforms are only legally obligated to remove content if there's a court order or if the government sends a notification.
Right.
But that notification has to line up with Article 19.2 of the Constitution.
Okay, so remind me, Article 19.2.
Article 19.2 lays out the reasonable restrictions on free speech.
Oh.
Things like national security, public order, preventing defamation.
Right. Standard stuff.
Yeah, you see this in a lot of democracies.
Okay, so X is saying that the government is now using Section 79 3B to get around the safeguards in Section 69A of the IT Act. And Section 69A, that's the main law for blocking online content.
Right, and 69A has much stricter requirements. The government has to give reasons for blocking something, and there's a way to challenge it legally.
Okay, so X is saying you can't just use this loophole in 79 to do something that you should be doing through 69A.
Right. They're saying it goes against due process and transparency.
Exactly. And they're pointing to things like a directive from the Ministry of Electronics and IT that came out in October 2023.
Okay.
And also this Sayog portal that launched in October 2024 as evidence of this, expanded use of 79.3b.
Overreach, potentially.
Yeah, they're saying that it's allowing for censorship beyond what the Supreme Court said.
And now bring it back to Grok.
Right.
Is that AI-generated content considered third-party content under Section 79?
So, it's like adding another layer to this legal battle.
It really is, yeah.
Is X responsible for Grok's, more...
feisty.
More outspoken remarks? Or does that only kick in if the government says, hey, take this down?
Yeah, this is uncharted territory.
It is.
This is where the courts are really going to have to grapple with this.
It really does highlight some huge issues that we have to deal with as AI gets more and more, prevalent online.
It does.
We're seeing this potential for AI to create and spread misinformation. We've got this fundamental question of who's accountable for what AI does.
Right, yeah.
It's still hard to moderate content in this, rapidly changing environment. And we need some clear guidelines and safeguards.
Clear rules of the road.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting that this whole thing has brought back discussions about the Indian government's AI advisory that they withdrew last year.
Yeah.
Which just shows that there's this tension between innovation in AI and the need for regulation.
Yeah, you don't want to stifle innovation.
Right.
But you also need some guardrails.
Exactly. It also brings up this question of AI free speech, right?
That's a fascinating one.
So in India, freedom of expression is a fundamental right. It's for citizens. But Grok's responses are determined by its code and the data it was trained on.
Right. So can an AI have free speech the way a human does?
It's a really big question.
Yeah, that's a huge question.
So this whole deep dive, this Grok situation, X's legal challenge, it really highlights a few things. We're seeing the rise of these uninhibited AI models.
Yeah.
Like Grok, they have so much potential, but also potential risks. And then figuring out who's responsible when AI says or does something controversial.
Right.
It's incredibly complicated.
It's a tough one.
And those laws around online content moderation, especially safe harbor, they're still changing and being challenged.
It's a very dynamic landscape right now. And the thing is, these aren't just abstract debates.
Right.
They have real consequences for all of us.
Right. It affects how we get information online.
Yeah, how platforms work, how we adapt to AI as a society.
It really does. So here's something to think about.
Yeah.
As AI keeps evolving and it's becoming more a part of our lives online, how do we balance free speech with protecting against misinformation and harm? Especially when the quote-unquote speaker isn't even human.
That's a great question to leave people with.
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind as we navigate this digital world.
Absolutely. It's a changing world.
Yeah.
We have to keep our eyes open and our ears open.
We do. It's exciting, but it's also a little bit scary.
It is a little bit scary, yeah.
But it's the future, right?
It is the future. We're living in it right now.
We are. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It was great having you.
Always a good time.
And to all of you listening, thanks for tuning in.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
And stay informed.
And stay informed. We'll see you next time.